listening to Hold On a Minute, a podcast by UNFPA Asia and the Pacific. This podcast series presents inspiring and powerful stories on the sexual and reproductive health and rights of women across the Asia-Pacific region. I'm Pupei Chawarat Yungjitranon, your host. In this episode, we call attention to how the limited access to information and knowledge of sexual and reproductive health and rights can be a barrier for the development and realizing the full potential of girls in the Asia-Pacific region. This has resulted in unintended pregnancies and child marriages that continue to affect girls in a region where more than half of the world's 1.8 billion young people aged 10 to 24 live. Comprehensive Sexuality Education, or CSE, an education program that includes scientifically accurate information about human anatomy, sexual and reproductive health, and relationships, is empowering young people to pursue healthier lives and stand up for a more equal world. Being founded on human rights principles, CSE advances gender equality and rights of young people. We now hear from Anup, a 17-year-old male teenager whose views and outlook of life have been transformed through CSE.
My name is Anup. I am 17 years old and live in a village with my parents and my two younger sisters. My older sister was married to a such older man at the age of 15. She is now a mother of two. I never thought much about the fact that my sister got married very young, had to drop out of school, and that she had no say in it. It's just such a normal thing in my village where girls marry young and give birth soon after. Not many girls finish school and men are considered the ones in charge who decide on what's good for their wife and their family. But I started questioning all of this after attending session at a youth club run by an NGO when I was 15 years old. A passionate teacher came to the club once a week to speak with us about many things like our body and relationships. It was eye-opening, and the teacher was so informative that I kept going back to learn more. First of all, I learned about the human body, including our reproductive organs. Nobody ever told me about this, and finally, all the changes that I have been going through as a teenager made sense. I also learned about the changes that girls go through and how things like their periods are nothing to be ashamed of, and that we should not push girls away and ostracize them just because they are having their periods. I learned that there are myths and harmful practices when girls get their period, like not allowing them to eat or drink milk or dairy products for the fear that cows and buffaloes will die. When I learned that this is not true, I secretly gave milk to my sister during her period. I also learned that men and women have the same rights and should be treated equally. When my parents tried to find a suitor for my younger sister, I told them how marrying young is harmful, both for my sister and our family. I told them that both she and our family will benefit more if she finishes school, learns what she likes, and finds a good job to earn an income. I told them that if she marries young, she has to rely on her husband, who may mistreat her or abuse her. My sister should decide when she wants to marry, if at all. I am graduating from secondary school soon and hope to join the university in the nearby city. My younger sister also hopes to finish school and go to university to become a midwife. She is standing up to our parents to convince them how this is good for her and for our parents as well. I will keep standing by my sister. I am committed to speaking up in my family and in my village so that we can stop practices that are harmful in our society to both women and men.
Hold on a minute. The story doesn't always end like this. Anup's story shows how education can transform not only one person's life, but a whole community. To learn more about CSE, I'm honored to have with me today Sandeep Nanwani, a reproductive health specialist with UNFPA Indonesia, and Vitika Yadav, a co-founder of Love Matters India and Teen Book. Sandeep, as a physician and an anthropologist, has deep interest in the intersections between gender, sexuality, and health. After starting his career in building a safe house for homeless people living with HIV in Indonesia, he has advocated for CSE and attributed to building a partnership with Indonesia's education ministry. Currently, he is a program specialist for reproductive health overseeing maternal health and family planning with the UNFPA Indonesia country office. Vitika is known for her work with the youth. She has co-founded Teen Book, India's first comprehensive life skills resource hub for adolescents, teenagers, parents, and educators. She has also co-founded Love Matters India, the first ever website in India that gives complete, honest, and unbiased information on sexual and reproductive health and rights in India that is in both Hindi and English. Currently, she is the chair of the Global Advisory Board on Sexual Health and Well-being. Now, we just heard an incredible story of Anup, who became an advocate himself for gender equality after learning about sexual and reproductive health and rights for everyone, including girls and women. First of all, can you tell us why it is important to also focus on boys and men when talking about gender equality and girls and women's empowerment? Sandeep, I just wanted to ask you about this. How is it important to focus on the perspectives coming from boys and men?
Yeah, that's a really good question. There's a common myth that gender inequality only affects women and girls, where in fact, gender inequality affects men, boys, women, and girls. Gender inequality is bad for everyone. And that's something that we need to bring up again and again. In a place where I work in Indonesia, there was a big study that looked at teenage boys and girls and looked at how gender inequality evolved as they grow. And what the study found was there was incredible amounts of violence for both boys and girls. And the root cause of that violence was gender inequality. And boys face a tremendous amount of violence because of masculinity, because they have to be brave, they have to not emote, and their peers perform a lot of violence to each other. And this violence is then internalized. And when they grow up, they can be the one perpetrating the violence. And there are studies linking experiences of violence in boys, linking them to perpetration of violence when they grow older. And so, engaging men and boys is extremely critical because gender inequality not only affects them, but they also contribute to developing a society where women and men have equal positions, have equal opportunities, and relationships are respectful, and people can express themselves regardless of any kind of societal expectations, and people can be themselves. And that is extremely critical, and that is extremely relevant for both boys and girls, especially younger boys, as they also grow and as they also learn what it is to become a boy, what it is to become a man, what it is to become a citizen, to become a parent, to become part of a relationship. As they learn that, they also need to know what it means to be part of the society that is equal, that is respectful. And therefore, when we talk about sexual and reproductive health, when we talk about reproductive rights, it is critical that we bring men into the conversation because they also form a part of the society. They also are affected by the gender inequality, the terrible, terrible, harmful norms that affect us all. In fact, these norms are the ones that we should change. These are the norms that we should include all men and boys and girls and women together to change to a society where everyone is more equal, more respectful, and everyone can be themselves as they are, expressing who they want to be, expressing what they feel inside freely and openly and safely. And so that's why in the story, Anup's story is really important to share, because boys do play a big role in creating the society.
What an eye-opener. You can't just address one side of the story. You have to address the other side, the other stakeholders, the other people who are involved as well. And why not? So one of the steps to doing that is definitely education. One of the concepts that we have heard and have seen been working on is comprehensive sexuality education. I want to know more about this, so I'd like to ask you further, Sandeep, about who this is for and how is it being delivered.
So Anup's story is a story of Anup being part of a program called Comprehensive Sexuality Education. And as you can see in his story, that really empowered him to create change and to work alongside his peers to create a society that is more equal. So that kind of education is really transformative and really life-changing. So what we mean by comprehensive sexuality education? So comprehensive sexuality education is a curricular process of learning and understanding oneself, one's relationships, one's bodies, and one's sexuality. It's a learning process of understanding yourself, your relationship, your bodies, as part of your whole comprehensive understanding of your sexuality. It's a learning and educational process. It is a very structured process that is incremental, and it has to be delivered in an age-appropriate way. And it can start from a very young age up to adults. Even adults continue to learn about their sexuality, their self, their bodies. And it is a very curricular and structured process. So when we talk about comprehensive sexuality education, there are certain principles or certain things that we need to keep in mind when thinking about comprehensive sexuality education. The first really important principle is whatever information that is part of this education process should be scientifically accurate. We know, for instance, there's a lot of myths about sexuality. Oh, like, for instance, if you drink certain things, then you have, you have certain sexual experience. If you do this, then you have less children or something. There are a lot of myths surrounding sexuality. And what is very critical in this kind of education is that it has to be delivered in a very scientifically accurate way so that people, young people, adolescents know what exactly the information is, that what exactly science tells us and what science does not tell us. The second is that sexuality education, learning about our sexualities, our bodies, relationships, cannot be given as suddenly you give everything all at once. It should be given in a very incremental way because you understand your body, you understand yourself as in an incremental way as well. So you can't tell everything all at once in one grade because you don't know about yourself. You need to experience, you need to be part of a relationship to understand what a respectful relationship is. You need to have some life experience also to understand what it means to live in this body or to live in a society that is gender unequal, things like that. And then what is most critical is that sexuality education should be gender transformative. What do we mean by gender transformative? Sexuality education should be delivered in a way where young people can actually observe and see, oh no, the world we live in is completely unjust. There is so many gender injustices that happen in my everyday life. And this kind of educational process, the pedagogy of teaching young people to be aware of the society that is completely unjust, completely unequal, is part of the process of sexuality education. So it's not just about a sperm meets an egg that creates a baby. That's part of sexuality education. But it's also about telling adolescents, why is it that women don't complete school? Why is it that pregnant women don't have enough choices? Why is it there is violence everywhere? It helps adolescents and young people understand the unjust world we all live in and help them realize, look, I am going to create a society and I want to move away from this injustice. And when you want to deliver this kind of transformative education process, you need to deliver it with a pedagogical method or with a method that is very interactive, that really, really centers on the learner, that really tries to understand the learner's experience and tries to help the learner understand themselves, understand their bodies, understand the relationships they forge, and understand the society they live in. There are a lot of UNFPA resources that the listener can read, that you can read more about sexuality education.
I'm sure most of the listeners like me are probably, especially if you're of the older generation, are probably wondering, where was this concept when we were young? Even if you put yourself in any country, when it comes to sexuality education or what you've been talking about, in terms of culture and what is right and what is wrong, it varies from country to country. So, when you think about the remote areas where you have communities where you have these concepts that have been ingrained in their community for so long, and you see your mother, your grandmother, act in a certain way, obviously the child can be very confused. And when you get the information, it's even more confusing if it's not done in an incremental way, as you said, and in a comprehensive way. But definitely if we can have that done, it's very pivotal and it's game changing. So let's head on to Vitika, because Vitika, you've been actively advocating for the sexual and reproductive health and rights of youth. Tell us why this issue is so important for the young people that you're working with.
I think it's the perspective that when we talk about comprehensive sexuality education and we talk about young people, it is important to understand that this goes beyond sex, right? It is not just about their physical health, but it is also, and sexual health, it's about their emotional well-being, it's about overall empowerment, because it helps them make informed choices, exercise their rights in a responsible way, and also pursue a healthy and fulfilling life, as they move towards adulthood, where they're also supposed to respect the rights and boundaries of others. So it is not just limited to self, it goes beyond self. It is about society, it is about relationships, it's about how we probably challenge and change and address social norms. So from that perspective of, we are all fighting a lot of issues and injustices, and we tend to, sort of not give importance to the fact that if we give information and power to young people with good quality information, they will be able to, sort of really be able to think about the kind of society and the families that they are a part of, popular culture, that obviously has a huge influence on them, and then be able to really see what perhaps needs to be challenged and changed in context of social norms. So, I really look at comprehensive sexuality education from the perspective of life skills. There is a lot of focus on academic skills, and many countries let's talk about, everywhere, but let's just talk about Asia. There's such a strong focus on being academically successful. But when it really comes to being successful in your personal life, there is no matrix for that, right? That is not something that is even considered important. This is more like, this is not, sort of mandatory, but this is good to have. And I think that thought process needs to change. This is not just good to have additional education along with academic education. This is a must-have. This should be non-negotiable, because this is about overall well-being, and this is about the future of the world, and a lot of other issues that that we are probably struggling with. So when we talk about why when we talk about why CSE is important, I think it is also important to understand that there's a lot of unlearning that we need to do as a society, and it's adults who are taking these decisions, right? We have decided, for example, what is age appropriate for young people and for children. Of course, we have a perspective on it, but we also need to understand that times are fast changing. Our experiences are different from the experiences of the children that they're having. Context is really important. It's not like something that has been, done in a particular country is going to be relevant in another context. Even in a country like India, the context would change every 100 kilometers. And those experiences have to be taken into account. You can have the best curriculum, but you will not be able to do justice to it if you do not have a process in place, or teachers or facilitators really understand the essence of it and contextualize it to suit the needs of the children who are supposed to gain something out of that curriculum. There is enough evidence to show that comprehensive sexuality education does not lead to more sexual activity. In fact, it shows that a lot of young people, adolescents, have actually shown positive outcomes. And there is evidence to be found that CSE has actually led to more responsible attitudes towards sex, but also delayed sexual debut among young people. Because when they have access to information, and about the consequences of early sexual activity, they would also understand the benefits of delaying sex until they are ready and they choose to wait. So countries are struggling with teenage pregnancy. There is burden of contraception also largely on girls and women. These are all realities. But the more information they have, they are able to exercise their right. And of course, a lot of other factors come in play. But just from the perspective of building healthy and respectful and consensual relationships, where a lot of men and boys are just, they're coming from a place where they're actually really confused about what consent really is. Because there is this expectation that it should be consensual and they should understand consent. So comprehensive sexuality education has to take into account those experiences, those confusions. And there's a lot of unlearning that has to be done as a society to make sure that, we are looking at an ecosystem that is supportive of young people, where they can lead a healthier life, make healthier choices. We don't have to package everything in such an academic way that it is not conversational at all. It does not connect with young people and with adolescents. You have to speak to them in a language that works for them, that they understand, that is friendly. And you have to be bold enough to go beyond your own biases and values. I have been on a journey as well. We have to allow that space to everyone. And we really need to be able to see it from, you have to step into their shoes, because even when we, and I have a 12-year-old boy, all right, and I understand how I can react as a parent, how I can react as a practitioner, and where facts and values sort of come in play. And I think that's the struggle. Like when I work with parents and teachers, I am really able to see things from their perspective and their lens, and bring out those difficult conversations. So even when we talk about evolving capacities of children, just age appropriate, it's been a question, because I think the experiences that children have in different contexts, in different communities, they're so different. And as they grow older, they're more able to understand about their lives and decisions that affect them. But it happens gradually, and it doesn't happen at the same speed for everyone. Yes, we cannot have a different plan for every child. That's not possible. But having that perspective as a teacher, as a facilitator, as a parent is extremely important. Comprehensive sexuality education can't be a one-way process. You have to make that space for discussions. You have to make the space to go beyond your own biases and own judgments. And in my view, essential life skills. It's about communication. It's about decision making. It's about assertiveness. It's also about creating a safe space and a supportive environment where young people can come, they can seek information, they can ask questions, and they can get the support that they need. But also not just from practitioners, but the community, the peers. So everybody can really be able to support each other in the society.
I think from talking to both of you, when you take a look at comprehensive sexuality education, or what you said, CSE, there's a lot of expectations for this, because it's got to be based on facts that are true. It's got to take into consideration of the cultural aspects. So when you apply this, it's different in every region and at every time as we innovate with technology, as information is widespread. So Sandeep, what is UNFPA doing to support CSE?
Yeah, it is a challenging program to develop and implement, because there's so many facets to tick. There's so many facets to get right, to show the impact, the enormous transformative impact of CSE. But as UNFPA, what we do is we try to approach it in different ways, through different entry points in the education system and in the non-formal system. So in UNFPA, we think about CSE in non-formal settings and in education settings. In the education sector, UNFPA works in helping governments and ministries of education and schools develop curricula that is responding to 21st century issues, 21st century problems, including dating online, issues that young people face online, things like that. So helping renew curricula to respond to issues that young people face, to try to develop, update curricula. That's one thing that UNFPA does. Another thing is we do a lot of training to educators, because you may, as Vitika rightly said, I actually love what you said, Vitika, that CSE is about learning, but also about unlearning biases. And to that process, that kind of pedagogy is not easy. It requires an extremely safe space. You, as a teacher, as an educator, you need to create that extremely safe space. You need to create a space that people with trauma can be safe, and they can share, and that's responsive to everyone's needs and safety. And so to do that, and that kind of educational pedagogy, you need a lot of training and skills. And so UNFPA does a lot of teacher training as well. We also do a lot of monitoring and evaluation, because we know that it's very difficult to measure how good CSE program is. So UNFPA also does measuring it within the education system. Particularly where I work in Indonesia, the setting is kind of paradoxical. Just as an information to everyone listening here, the most recent survey for adolescents and youth revealed that despite 80% more than 80% of adolescents and unmarried adolescents and youth are receiving information from their teachers. So we have a lot of teachers are providing information on sexual reproductive health. Only 13% of them have accurate HIV sexual reproductive health information. So in Indonesia, what we thought was, wow, a lot of this information is being given in schools, but why is it not translating to actual empowerment? That's the question we asked. And when we looked at the field, we saw that teachers were delivering sexuality education in a way that was extremely moralizing and not empowering at all. So they were just saying, this is right and that is wrong. So in UNFPA Indonesia, we work with the Ministry of Education and said, look, that does not work at all. What we need to do is we need to train teachers to teach in a way that centers the experiences of young people as part of their teaching. And this is relevant not only for sexuality education, but for all kind of education. So in Indonesia, there's a huge education movement to center education on the lived experiences of the learners. And so we piggybacked on it, and we trained teachers to create pedagogy, to create methods in class that centers on young people's experiences. And the results was kind of incredible. It required a lot of training, but for instance, that I was in one of the field sites, and when the teacher talked about sexual desire and they asked their students, do you think sexual desire is something that is good, bad, normal, not normal? And almost everyone said, oh, it's not good, it's not normal. And then the teacher said, no, it's actually a very human feeling to feel sexual desire, something like that. And then she demystified that both women and men equally have desire, sexual desire. And the teacher did it in a very interactive way. And I was observing the class, and a young girl came up to me and said, and I asked her, so what is the one thing that you take away from this class? And what she said was really quite amazing. She said that I did not know that men and women have equal sexual desire. I always thought it was okay for men to conduct sexual violence to women because they have more desire, and it's not about the desire. There's no biological explanation at all for sexual violence. It's completely okay. And she was kind of surprised to learn about that in that class in a way that was interactive. And I bring that experience everywhere. And I tell teachers, look, if you want to teach in a way that is empowering, find a method that centers on your learner's experience. And we do this even with learners with disabilities, including intellectual disabilities. So we have a program where we train teachers to deliver sexuality education to learners with intellectual disabilities, and the stories are incredible. And young girls with intellectual disabilities saying to me when I visit the field, saying like, oh, I now can put my pad myself. I know what menstruation is. I know that I need to lock the bathroom. I know what is a safe space. I know what is an unsafe space. I know who I can trust and who I cannot trust. And it was completely empowering. And the mom of that young girl told me, I used to change her pad by myself, thinking that, she won't know anything about menstruation because she has intellectual disability. But in fact, now that the teacher has taught her about menstruation and putting pads and cleaning, taking care of your body, what is safe, what is unsafe, she does it herself. And that reduces the amount of burden that I need to take care of my young girl. And, so CSE programs can be extremely effective, but it is also a very hard program that requires a lot of resources and a lot of facets.
Sandeep, I feel I feel so excited about what you're saying because of the fact that there's so much potential that you could do with this program. I mean, you have all the core components ready. You just need to have the resources and for everyone to work together. But let's take a look at some of the challenges maybe for our listeners to understand more about what really needs to be done on the ground. Ritika, we've heard from you, from your side as a mother to, can I say preteen? Preteen, 12 years old. That's a big challenge in itself. But as a practitioner and a leader in this field, what can we learn from the challenges that you've faced in advocating for the young people's sexual and reproductive health and rights? You've teased a little bit. I mean, I heard a little bits here and there, for example, about, the confusion of, the program, the comprehensive program versus the, what would you say, like the old school sexual education?
I always find this question very interesting because I also feel some of these fears are in our heads. Because we feel, oh my God, of course, you have to, there is going to be some sort of discomfort, that will come from what you intend to do, given we understand the society and the culture and the community. But exactly the fight that we have been on for decades is around injustices around gender and, talking about a host of other problems. We've been fighting teenage pregnancy. We're talking about, rape and just the rape culture and sort of all of that. But the thing is, when we're talking about comprehensive sexuality education, we feel a lot of people will be uncomfortable and we want to avoid that. And the thing is, the biggest sign of success for any CSE program is if people start feeling uncomfortable. If I was making an M&E framework for a comprehensive sexuality education program, I do not want to speak, I'm not going to speak to the converted, right? We're talking about changing mindsets. You need to have evidence in place. So if you're challenging existing gender norms, power dynamics, and that is a very, very core part of what comprehensive sexuality education is all about, because you're going to be discussing sexual autonomy, you're going to be discussing consent, you're going to be discussing reproductive choices. And all of these topics are bound to face resistance because there are deeply ingrained gender inequalities. And there is burden of contraception on women because it is linked to, sort of masculinity and patriarchy. I mean, the way we have looked at signs of success is when the discussions have started on platforms, especially, when young men and boys get on the platforms and then they speak up. It's such a huge sign of success because these conversations have not existed in our society. Technology, digital spaces are public spaces, and we need to be able to use these spaces as well. So when people oppose or resist or say something, it's an opportunity. And I think our approach to deal with it is that, well, great. We did great because people are talking about it. Now let's have a conversation. And the conversation does not have to come from a place of, well, we know more because we are practitioners. We know more because this is our bread and butter, right? This is not what they do day in and day out. So start looking at things from their perspective. Try and unpack it for them to understand. And social norms are not going to change overnight. This is hard work. There needs to be consistency in everything, and it also needs to be supported with resources. So I feel in context of the work that I have done, a lot of people would say, oh, there must have been so much political backlash, and with any government in India, actually, we have not faced that. The backlash has actually come from the digital gatekeepers. They have not put any thought around how algorithms will work. AI is being fed with. I think AI, that one of the big projects should be a lot of unlearning that needs to be done with these, machine learning and AI, because everything that has been fed is from the perspective of patriarchy and those who've been working, in the system. So the opposition that I feel we have faced, and the resistance that we have faced, is from the online gatekeepers, and we are advocating in such a big way with them. And the idea is not to tell them what you're doing wrong, but holding them accountable and tell them, well, you can do better and you should do better. And young people need to be at the forefront, right? Because they are digital natives, and they need to be able to question how the information that they need is being censored in a certain way, and why is it being censored, and what does it mean in terms of freedom of expression. And in that process, there is unlearning for these digital platforms as well.
I think with all that we've heard from both of you today, it's pretty clear that the idealistic way or thinking that we have progressed in sexual education is the facts remain we're still not there. Despite the fact that we've progressed so much in innovation, information is everywhere. We have technology to assist us. Sadly, in the wide media platforms, the headlines like comprehensive sexual education is not there. And it's not really telling us what's happening that could help change, that could help pivot the challenges that we're hearing. And the fact that even as we're talking now, I wouldn't be surprised if some people didn't click to listen to this podcast because of the topic itself. So I hope that people who are listening to this podcast are not just those who are in the field, but those who are open to these new ideas that we've been talking about. So to end our talk, let's find a final message from both of you, especially on the occasion of the International Youth Day, of what you feel we've accomplished and what we still can do. Sandeep?
Yeah, so for me, I think we know what works. We know what needs to be done, and I think that's an accomplishment. We have more evidence now than we had before, and more young people are also creating content online and addressing this unmet need online. They're actually taking the leadership despite not having a supportive environment, and pushing things forward. And my message is, let's create that supportive environment for young people to express themselves, share what they think about sexuality, teach each other, create content that is relevant to their everyday lives. And let's also empower teachers, create an enabling environment for teachers and educators to create that space for where young people can discuss openly, safely about issues that are so central to everyday life. So for me, let us all work to create that enabling environment for both young people and for teachers, because they have been pushing the fold without this support, and let's support them and amplify their voices.
Ritika?
Yeah, my message for International Youth Day would be, one, for young people to recognize and realize that they have a huge responsibility to take this work forward. And I think they have to be at the forefront. And for stakeholders and all the stakeholders to actually come together and really understand, are we missing the most important voices, which is the voices of young people when we're talking about decision making about them, and that affects them. I think my final message really is that I think as for different stakeholders to agree on what we think is the definition of comprehensive sexuality education. I think the work is much more difficult, also because largely in the landscape and different stakeholders have their own perspective on what comprehensive sexuality is and it should be about. I think there has to be space for more dialogue and more unity. Otherwise, we are jeopardizing the work that has been done so far, and we are actually not going to make progress and move forward. Thank you.
Pritika, Sandeep, we commend you for your work that you've been doing so far, something that can definitely change the way culture is in a positive way. And we can only hope that there can be more awareness, especially from our conversation today, as well as this year's International Youth Day, on the issues that really matter in our society today. Thank you so much. This has been the latest episode of Hold On a Minute by UNFPA Asia Pacific. It is our hope that this episode opens your eyes on how crucial CSE is in empowering the youth in the Asia Pacific region for better sexual and reproductive health and rights. For more insightful episodes of Hold On a Minute by UNFPA Asia Pacific, follow our podcast pages on Spotify, Facebook, YouTube, and Apple Podcasts. Just search for UNFPA Hold On a Minute. See you in our next episode.